Hey everyone, hope everybody is doing well. So, I wanted to make this video responding to Brianne Worth on YouTube regarding the gender wars because she responded to a video on a debate made by Andrew Wilson, one of the critics of modern women. And basically, her stance is that we are independent and we don't need a man. Which, if you want to live that way, that's fine. But at the end of the day, you have to deal with the consequences. And if we're really not gaining much, then we have to respond accordingly. Okay. Now, I wanted to kind of address about some of the claims she made and how it's pretty misleading. It's not as true as it claims to be. So, when she means independent, the reality is typically women, especially young adult women, they're typically making $40,000 to $50,000 a year. That's not really independent. That's not an easy, comfortable living wage, at least in certainly the vast majority of the country. These statistics show that only half of women by age 30 have really a college degree. It's actually a smaller share here in the Las Vegas Valley, but we still see plenty of women by their upper 20s and early 30s that still are not married or not in any committed relationship. Women are still more likely to live paycheck to paycheck. And even if they have the same income as men, their spending habits are much differently, which I'll get to that later. A lot of them are, actually most of them are really working in dead-end jobs that they don't really enjoy. They are very stressed out, they're burnt out. A lot of them are experiencing a higher rate of credit card debt. Like I said, even if both men and women have $50,000 a year in income, their spending habits are different. So all that interest and everything accumulates. They are experiencing high levels of student loan debt. The number is growing. About 2/3 of student loan debt are held by women. Now, people will say, well, you can just make college free. However, the reality is that first of all, the money has to come from somewhere. I mean, you can change the loans and the policies and tuition, and I get that. But the reality is a good chunk of these women are disproportionately like to get into majors that have very poor career prospects, or they're working in jobs that are not really even related to their major. Now, the way it works when it comes to their employment, a lot of them tend to want to work in particularly office type jobs, usually inside buildings that's often air conditioned. This tells you that they don't really tend to go for high earning jobs that are typically physically outside, or they're blue collar heavy labor jobs. And basically the whole plan is when we're really independent, what it really means is that, well, since we refuse to start a family, we're just going to keep working until we are 80 years old. Now, another reason to kind of debunk this whole claim about that we don't need a man and women are physically different, as you know. Okay, this is why it's still taboo for a man to physically attack a woman. So when it comes to, for an example, opening a jar that is very tight, this young woman who was living with me at that time, we were together, she woke me up early in the morning so I can open a jar. Okay, and then think about it. Why couldn't her hands do that? Because we are physically different. When there are pests coming in the house, they respond differently. They're more likely to be scared. They are more likely to experience difficulty lifting heavy objects. When they're walking outside, they feel less safe. And they are, because they're physically different, they're more likely to need men to protect them while they're walking out during the nighttime, especially. Okay, so there's all these different things. And again, they still need men to do all the heavy labor jobs, particularly utility work, mining, forestry, energy extraction, whether it's almost all truck drivers, air traffic controllers, even inside office jobs like white collar positions like engineering. About 90% of those jobs are still done by men. In fact, it's interesting because in Iran, women are more likely to graduate with STEM degrees than they are here in the U.S., despite Iran's policy is way different. And I'm telling you this because I am a son of two immigrants from Iran, believe it or not. They expect men to overwhelmingly to protect them in the military, for protection, keep the streets safe, and so forth, protect against outside invaders. And not to mention, when they really mean independent, remember, women are more likely to get subsidized and pumped up by government support programs. Not to mention, a lot of employers, particularly corporations, they engage in quotas, DEI programs. Government jobs, which disproportionately were created in the last several decades, are more likely to be given to women. Hence, the federal layoffs and everything we've seen recently is disproportionately affecting women. In addition, that when they talk about women having a higher standard of living is because lending policies have changed, not just from like 70 years ago, but I'm talking about within the last 30, 40 years, because interest rates, how much you can borrow, what you can pay back, all these things have changed. So in reality, what we have is a lot of factors in terms of policy have changed that has created manipulative features to inflate their standard of living. And a lot of this has resulted in unequal standards. Now, when we really talk about the changes among women, our dissatisfaction, it's really about how the environment that we've created has impacted women. In other words, if you're dating in 1995, we're not just comparing to 1945, 1995. And if you are a man who is a top earner of 20-30%, if you're good looking, you're a gentleman, your rewards in terms of what you get in a dating market, relationships, is less than what it was now. Of course, men are not getting as much rewards as they used to. When you look at women in 1995, how they talk, how they act, their lifestyle, their views, their mindset, their values has considerably changed. And it's not like women have considerably far less rights in 1995 than they do now. So, and even when you look at non-Western societies, which I'll get to that a little on. So in reality, what is really a war is a war against the cultural trends. It's not so much changing the laws and make everything exactly like what it was 80 years ago. But this is kind of what they do. They conflate the two, they kind of distract, they kind of manipulate psychology to think that if we're against modern women, we automatically think we want to oppress them, make everything exactly what it was back in the day. But what we're really against are the cultural norms. Now, sure, there are some policies that we don't like when it comes to family court. There are some who are critical of no-fault divorce, but my issue is really particularly child support, alimony, custody, depending on the states where you live, although some states are moving into the right direction recently. When you talk about the draft, let's say there's a shortage of people in the military, men have to be drafted if there's not enough people to defend this country, but women are not. So personally, I think that if you're voting and you're a certain age, regardless if you're men or women, you are subject to the draft. Now, to be fair, there's a lot of things that I don't necessarily agree with the manosphere, the red pill content. I don't believe that women are overwhelmingly going only for men that are over 6 foot whatever. When I go outside, I still see many men who are shorter than me. I'm 5'11", by the way, and they're still having partners. Sometimes the man can be shorter than the woman. Sometimes the woman can be above average in looks. But in reality, what women don't want to admit is that this whole red pill content, this whole manosphere, all these voices that's been gaining ground, it's really the symptom because women have changed. Like I've told you, if women haven't changed much from 1995, then all these red pill content people will not have been gaining a lot of traction. See, but this is the really myth that I wanted to kind of address, is because many of these articles, the establishment media likes to say, well, women aren't getting married in their 20s because they're solely focusing on careers. But in reality, regardless of whether they're getting into their careers or not, or getting a bachelor's degree, many of them are still hooking up with several guys, often dozens of men, but for some reason, they're not getting commitment or they're not getting marriage. Now, of course, data can be misleading when they say like 45% of women by a certain age is going to be single by 2030. Again, remember, a lot of those women are unmarried, but they still may be in some kind of family structure. They probably still have kids. They're still partnered with men. So these statistics can be kind of misleading. However, keep in mind, though, that we still have a growing number of women who are living by themselves. They have no committed relationship, and a lot of these women don't have a college degree and no real career prospects. They engage with a lot of hookups because, for one reason, it's where they date, where they go. For an example, if you keep going to clubs versus coffee shops, how they treat men, how they act, who they date, because we have a lot of women in these podcasts admit that good men are boring, and the mass media promotes the idea, oh, it's so cool to date toxic men that treat you like crap that just came out of prison. So all of these things matter, but the mass media doesn't want to cover it. They give you so much partial truth, so you don't really question the narrative. And besides, going back to her point of view, if men are still being oppressed, if men are still letting you down, if you're still unhappy with the system, then why not just break up the country? If men are doing everything they can to satisfy you, to please you, but somehow it's just no matter what we do, we're still oppressing you, we're still living under this patriarchy, well then take the United States, break it up, have certain men who you don't like to separate. I mean, we've got some desert lands 40 miles away from Las Vegas. We can just build our own society, separate, and have our own system, and then you can just get away from us. And then there's no more sexism or misogyny or whatever you want to call it. But they never advocate for that. Think about it. Just like the whole standard of my body, my choice, which, if you're going to have abortion legal, then men should not have to pay for child support when the kid is done. If he doesn't want to pay for it, he doesn't want the kid. And if you believe in my body, my choice, then brothels should be legal all over the country. Okay? And suppressing brothels doesn't really work because a lot of times people will do it under the table. Now, the thing is that with the problem with their narrative is like, okay, some women don't want to have a family. They don't want to work. They probably just want to work until they're 80 years old. That's fine. But what happens when 100% of women do that? You see, it doesn't work. It's not sustainable in the long term. That's the problem. It's just like if you had all female rabbits and leopards say, okay, I don't want to have kids. Their species are done. And if a lot of species do that, our food supply, our natural factors are definitely threatened. But here's where the real heart of the issue is, that what she doesn't really want to understand is that this change that we're seeing, some change was necessary, and I agree, but it wasn't really organic, okay? Because we know that it's the wealthy elite that run the corporations that have a lot of lobbying power, elite, particularly powerful men. They fund and promote these organizations, mass media, because remember, music, movies, television, it's not just social media. Things were going downhill before 2010. You look at television shows, how they've transitioned in the last several decades. Academia, universities, public schools, they're funding this so-called anti-family, anti-traditional message. So it's not organic. A lot of it has to do with the environment that you're raised in. Obviously, if you're raised in an environment that's totally different, you're going to have a different value system. So a lot of things that we like, we enjoy, or who we are is based on our environment. But the media doesn't want to talk about that. The media doesn't want to admit that a lot of the promises are not what they're told to be. We're told that the sexual revolution was going to increase sexual activity, was going to bring more options. But now we're seeing a lot of problems associated, many different illnesses, many different basically disgust, dissatisfaction, depression. We are a very sexualized society with the way women dress, the way women present themselves in the media, and so forth. But there's a lot of studies that have shown that typically millennial and Gen Z men and women are having less rates of intercourse than they did decades and generations prior. Keep in mind, but then again, things could definitely change, just like kitchen appliances, a lot of different technologies, birth controls, technologies to reduce the infant mortality rate, changes in jobs, changes in how we move from the rural to suburbs and the cities over time, how that's drastically changed women and dating. And what could change, as a matter of fact, is we could see more and more technologies that can come in and be a game changer, like AI dolls, and more men going overseas for passport bros. When I went to the Philippines, it was a much different dating game, much different social environment. I was able to get dates and a lot of different things a lot better than I can in the United States. I mean, sure, this month, I did have intercourse, but, if the amount of activity I got in the Philippines was way more than it was here in Las Vegas, believe it or not. And so this tells you, well, maybe it's a cultural trend. Women actually in the Philippines have a better gender equity score, according to many metrics, than in the United States, despite all the efforts we've done in America. The reality is a lot of this is cultural. They're raised in different environments. And this is why men are going to these overseas countries. And of course, they don't have these pesky divorce laws that we have, particularly in the Western world. But then again, it's not like women are being so oppressed in the Philippines. It's certainly not like Afghanistan or Sudan or a lot of these other countries, though. But then again, the point is that this system is so one-sided, it's so rigged, people are very dissatisfied. Really what this is about is equity. It's about equal outcome. So by that mentality, they believe that if you look at San Jose, the third largest city in California, they believe that it's the most sexist city in America because it has the largest pay gap than any other major city in America. Now, why do you think that is? Largely because if you look at the employment that exists in San Jose, particularly tech jobs, software engineering, are overwhelmingly done by men. All the things you guys take for granted, all the great things you have, your ability to use your smartphone is almost entirely maintained, processed, and created by men. Okay, and this is the thing. Western women are the most privileged women in the face of the earth that's ever exactly existed. But then when you look at a lot of local areas like West Texas, where there's a lot of oil drilling, rural Nevada, where there's a lot of mining, even when you look at wealthy, affluent areas, when you compare Summerlin South versus the city of Las Vegas, you'll see that there's a larger pay gap. Or Beverly Hills versus Los Angeles, because affluent cities have larger pay gaps because attractive women tend to gravitate to more successful men, and they're less likely to want to work. They are able to obtain his resources, his purchasing power. That's really the thing you've got to really understand. So the pay gap is very local and also differs a lot by age. In some cities like Los Angeles, young women in their 20s out-earn young men in their 20s, believe it or not. However, keep in mind, though, the pay gap explodes once they hit in their 40s. So somehow there's sexism in their 40s, but there's no sexism in their 20s. And this is a really thing. When you call this out, they call you incels, they call you're a misogynist, and all this other stuff. They, like, oh, you can't get laid, despite that we're such a sexualized society. It's supposed to really do the opposite that it claims to do. But in reality, this really proves that, well, in this, what you're really doing is, it's interesting, you're engaging in this act of hookup culture. But if that's the case, then how do we have so many so-called incels, And do these men don't want to get laid? Is it because they can't, or they just don't want to participate? Nobody really ever talks about that. I mean, look, I can go a few steps down and there's women I can pay and they can just come to my house. Okay, you know how it works out here. So keep in mind, though, that, okay, maybe if you're broke and whatever, I guess it becomes a lot more difficult. But again, there's just so much false promises and everything. And here's the other thing. It's like, well, if we're having all these dating problems, last but not least, why don't all these powerful, empowered women, why don't they just give us a guide, a pamphlet of how to approach women, what to do, where to go, what to say? They don't ever tell you that's where to go. Because really the reality is probably the largest issue I have with dating, especially trying to date women in their 20s, I'm 33, or just trying to make guy friends in their 20s. A lot of people just stay at home more than anybody else. And I'm not a person, I don't like to go to bars and clubs to meet somebody new. I would prefer to go to meet somebody at a grocery store, a park, a gas station, everyday common places, typical normal hangout spots that I'm interested in. But this is the problem with our culture, is that we've normalized the nightlife scene. Although the popularity is coming down, people are seeing what it really is. And the fact of the matter is, it's no accident why things are the way they are. We've normalized using the apps to meet people, and despite that these apps are losing popularity. And it's no accident why things are the way they are, because back in the day, People used to meet at work, school, mutual friends, family, religious institutions, all these different things, but those methods are not as popular as they used to be. Think about it. And really the sad reality is if women would tell us why they reject us, maybe we can learn, maybe the quality of men can improve, and we actually have something that we can work on. But we rarely get told that, so we have to use some indirect communications to figure out what's going on. But see, again, the point I'm trying to make with Brianne Worth, with this woman, is that so many of her stance is so one-sided. It's so just, honestly, like, if you don't really appreciate us, if we're not getting much out of you, then why live together? Why live in the same country? Live in the same society? In fact, 40% of young women surveyed that they want to leave the United States. So I guess we're just not meant to live in the same society. But anyway, what do you guys think about all this? What do you think about her video? You know, is there something that I've missed? You let me know. But other than that, look, folks, this is just so messed up. It's so one-sided. We're going to have a discussion. Men are going to have to finally rise up. Look, I think if we can have like 10% of truck drivers say, hey, listen, you need us so badly, you're going to treat us like crap. We're going to take our trucks. We're going to have caravans, convoys in major cities. We're going to just literally take over the streets. And until women change, we're not going to deliver goods and products. If 10% of truck drivers can do that, there has to be some shock event. I'm telling you. We can't just do things digitally. We have to take to the streets. There's going to have to be some kind of event. Okay? This is not going to work. It's not sustainable. It's not making all parties satisfied. Okay? There's going to have to be some kind of deal made. So you let me know what you think. Thank you guys so much. Please spread this video.